Hey, it's Doug and I'm back with another video. We might call this an Emerald Hills Sky Skylet. Tonight we're going to try to calibrate the Octopi-Astro camera interface with this ZWS ASI 2600 MC Pro camera. And I just thought I'd do a little bit of a pre-shoot about what we'll have to work on in order to do this tonight. And it is advantageous sometimes to start a little bit ahead of time and kind of get your bearings before you go out to the field. First thing you'll notice is I do keep the camera in a Ziploc bag. If you have a if you have a camera interface by Octopi-Astro, unless you have one of the new ones with the plug that seals your camera surface, otherwise, make sure you keep it in a Ziploc bag to keep the camera sensor free of any dust. I just also wanted to point out, I really like this design in the new Octopi-Astro interface for the RASA 11 at least. Notice that these screws, these little grub screws here, allow you to put this onto the RASA and then tighten it up with these grub screws on the side instead of this threading action that has been such a RASA norm. And I really like that because that allows you to avoid your threading to maybe get galded onto the RASA, and then when you try to unscrew it at the end of your observing, you loosen the actual lens group that's there in your corrector plate. So I like this because there is no spinning at all on that corrector plate assembly, that lens group. Instead, you use these grub screws, and it really is handy to have a collection of hex wrenches. I like these ones from Eklund, E-K-L-I-N-D. I like to have the 1/8 inch, the 7/64, and the 2 millimeters, and I get them with a 9-inch hex so that no matter where the camera is, I can reach it and I don't have to get my fingers really close or around the corrector plate very much. Maybe a finger up here to help me just act as a sensor to help me get the tip of the hex into the screw, but I don't have to touch the corrector plate on the RASA. When you get this properly assembled, the next thing you want to do is label these screws with, I use a piece of a tape that's not going to leave any kind of residue here. And you can see that called by different names. Sometimes I think it's called strike tape. You see it by different names, so you don't leave a residue with some kind of normal tape. Gaffer's tape is similar if you wanted to use colored gaffer's tape. And you'll notice there are, after you label these 1, 2, 3, 4, remember there are 2 screws here. And the one acts as a set screw, that's the thinner screw. And then this fatter screw acts as your movement screw to move the camera in and out of this interface. Now for this to work correctly, don't forget you have to have these lateral screws loose a little bit. Those can't be ratcheted down. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that they're not sealed, because if those side screws are sealed in, then it's not going to permit the camera to move inside of this interface. I really like the way the Octopi-Astro interface feels. As I've said before, it feels beefy. It gives you a very strong feeling around your camera, rather than the one that comes with the RASA, which to me feels very tinny. So once these lateral screws are loose, then the next step is you want to be able to place the camera in a starting position. Now, you can start with the camera all the way ratcheted in, but I can tell you in advance that the folks at Octopi-Astro are not going to arrange what they think will be your good focal back set, they're not going to arrange that to be when the camera is ratcheted in against this lower plate. They're going to try to make that like a millimeter out at least away from that plate. What I find is that if I use some kind of caliper, and I really don't see how we can do this work, RASA owners, without a good pair of calipers, because these screws are so sensitive. Just turning them a little bit, it can change the tilt in large part on your camera. So I like to have this kind of caliper that has what's called a depth gauge. Notice how when I am expanding the caliper down here, which is the normal part you'd use, this caliper has a depth gauge here on this end. And I just have pretty much the least expensive Mitutoyo gauge that I could buy. I think Mitutoyo is kind of the standard Japanese-made instrument, caliper-wise. And the one I got was the standard Mitutoyo absolute coolant proof. It's an IP67, but you could actually get whichever one you want. I do recommend the brand Mitutoyo. Let's see, the serial number I have on this is a B like Bravo. The serial number won't help you. The model number is what you need. CD like Charlie Delta, and then P like Papa, 6 asterisk S, or 6-inch S, I guess is what that is. CDP 6-inch S. But it has this depth gauge, and what that allows you to do is measure the height of these screws that help you be able to set your distance. And you can measure any of the screws you want, but I like to measure this fatter one. Keith at Octopi-Astro, they call these push and pull screws. I think this is the one he calls push, and this is the one he calls pull, because in his mind, you're pulling the camera out from the interface. However, I'll just be honest with you, in my way of thinking, the way you're pulling the camera out is that this screw is pushing against that plate. So I don't know which one to call the push and the pull, to be honest, because to me that's a deceptive term. So I just call this one the thin one and this one the fat one, and that helps me to keep them apart. So what you want to do is settle on the one you're going to measure, and I recommend the fat one. And then you want to figure out how you're going to measure so that the depth gauge is the same every time you measure. And again, this depth gauge is going to float up and down. And you probably want to have, you see how there's a part of the depth gauge that is kind of cut away? And I like to put that one away from the fat screw, because I've noticed if I try to turn it like this, that cutaway kind of gets stuck on the shoulders of this fat screw. So by holding the top of the calipers and using this little thumb screw that's here on the side, you can be pretty precise. You want to make sure that your calipers are straight up and down, because that again will affect the measurement you get. When you start, I kind of recommend, I've noticed that with the RASA 11 and the camera position, I think most of the time Keith gives you a setting so that ratcheted down against the plate, it will be about a 7 millimeter height for the top of this fat screw. So I think I'm going to start tonight, when I do this calibration, I think I'm going to start with maybe the fat screw. I'm kind of torn. I want to make sure that I am closer than the height that he thought would be the proper back set. So I think I'll set these on about 7.75 millimeters. So again, I'm gonna push that down and make sure it doesn't hit my tape. And once I press it down, then you notice that's right now on 10.5. So I'm actually 10.3. So I think I will show you the first step as we start to adjust this. Right now with the depth gauge calipers here, the camera's set on about 10 millimeters. This is where I started the other night, and it was not proper back set, not proper back focus. So I'm going to push the camera closer to the primary mirror. So that means I'm going to loosen this thin screw, which sort of acts like a lock or a set screw, a padlock, and I'm going to ratchet this screw down. So I'm going to start out and I'm going to go like, well, let me loosen the others so that I'm going to be working as a group here, because you do have to kind of do these together as you work because they all kind of float together. And there are 4 set screws on the RASA 11 interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, now watch, I'm going to watch the top, and that's a half turn, and then I'm going to do another half turn. So that's a full revolution. I think I'm going to just go ahead and do 3 revolutions. So there's 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. That's pretty tight. Okay, then I'm going to make sure these are loose enough for me to do 3 revolutions. So I'm loosening up the thin screws as I go, and when I loosen these thin screws, that's the padlock. So I've already done my 3 on this. Now I'm going to do 3 revolutions on screw number 2. Okay, so again, look at the position of this. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. That's 7.75 all around all 4 screws would be even sensor setting. However, with such tight variances, we're talking about 1/10 of a millimeter, you know, that's the thickness of what, a piece of paper. With such tight variances, even the way you have the camera mounted in the interface, it could be off a little bit. So that's the genius of the Octopi-Astro camera interface. You start out with these even, but then when you see the scope and the way it performs, you fine-tune these in the field with the scope. Now, once again, I want to make sure you understand why I started at 7.75. I know because I've played with this interface that 7 millimeters height on this screw is pretty much as close as the camera can be to the primary mirror, 7. And Octopi-Astro is giving us about 1 millimeter of play before they think we should be at a proper back focus. So by coming out to 7.75, I'm intentionally starting a little bit shy of what I think will be proper back focus. Tonight, when I have this mounted on the scope and I take those first images, maybe it'll be beautiful as is, and then I won't have to change anything. But if I do have to change things, I know I'm just going in one direction. I don't have to guess and try to go back and forth and back and forth. So I'm going to start at 7.75. I'm going to work outward. I'm going to be pushing the camera farther away from the primary mirror tonight when I start the calibration. So I'm going to speed up the camera now till I have all 4 screws set at exactly 7.75. Okay, 7.75 on all of the fat screws, which are pushing the camera down closer to the lens, to the primary mirror rather. Now I'm going to take up the slack until these thin screws are snug. And that's all I want to do is just take them up till the thin screws are snug. Now that's another reason why I like these longer hex wrenches, because they kind of prevent you from really ratcheting down these screws. I'm kind of like learning to use the same amount of torque when I fasten those down, and I kind of like jiggle a little bit to make sure the slack is out, but I'm not pushing it in too hard. Okay, so now the interface is set so that when I start calibrating tonight, this cap has ensured us that that sensor should be floating level. I am not going to ratchet down the lateral screws because these screws are really holding the sensor in place, and I'm pretty sure that when I start tonight it won't be perfectly aligned anyway. I'll have to do some adjusting, but I just want to remind you, if you achieve heaven, in your book, heaven meaning less than 20 or 30% curvature, field curvature, so you have proper back focus, and say less than 10% tilt, so you have proper sensor alignment, then don't forget to ratchet down these lateral screws. So the interface will then be set, and then when we put it on and off of the scope, these Grub screws with their little, see how they have a kind of a spear tip. They have a spear tip. They'll make sure that the camera is flat against the corrector plate of the RASA. Gabby, our dog, is excited because she knows that we're going to be trying to calibrate the RASA tonight, and I hope you're excited too. Let's go out to the field next in the dark. Hello, we're out here in the dark. It's 9:45. We've got the scope set up there behind us. We were able to autofocus in Nina, and we were able to polar align in SharpCap, and things worked out pretty well. We then moved over to my favorite star field, which centers on a star named HD 192911, and we've just snapped the first snapshot. I'm going to drop in the screen so that you can see it without having to move the camera and try to take a picture of a picture. But I'll drop in the screen here, and you can see that we do have some field curvature as we suspected. It's turning out to be, let me get it set up here. Now there's the view of the actual screen. There's the curvature. It's right now it's reporting around 56%. You get a little bit of variation between the curvatures, but the tilt is coming in at 87%. So sure enough, it's needing some love. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to go over to the scope and make an adjustment in the camera that I showed you just a while ago earlier. And what we're going to do now is we're going to bring the camera out away from the primary mirror about 0.25 of a millimeter, and that'll put it right at 8 millimeters. That's the height of that fat screw I was showing you a while ago. So we're going to bring all 4 screws together in unison out to 8, and then we'll snap another snapshot and then go back to CCD Inspector and do another field curvature view, and hopefully we'll be going in the right direction. And we'll probably go 0.25 of a millimeter and keep working out away from the primary mirror until we can get this down a little more under control. It is cold. It's 53 or 54 degrees, so there is something to be said for getting this done so we can work inside our control room over there in that building and view the scope remotely. You can see the scope behind me. It's aimed almost straight up, and that's what you want. You want a good star field that's not going to be like close to the horizon with distortion and everything. It's aimed almost straight up, and that's why I brought this stepping stool, so that I'll be able to climb up and reach down inside the dew shield and make that adjustment. I noticed the other night when I just played with the adjustment just enough to get the thing going, that within 10 minutes, if you don't have the dew shield on, within 10 minutes the collector plate covers up with dew. So you got to keep that dew shield on, and that means reaching down inside of it to make that camera adjustment. Fortunately, those screws, see, are pointed out in the direction of the sky, and so we can make those adjustments with a little bit of problem, very little problem. Okay, as long as we have the stepping stool. Okay, I'll probably stop the camera and we'll see how we do, and I'll start back again when we've made some progress. It is finished. Welcome back. I'm inside now in the control room. Boy, it was cold out there. I'm not gonna lie, I mean, it got down to like 42, and I put on a coat and all, but it just was damp and just freezing through and through for this time of year, I thought. I guess it's because you're sitting still, you know, working with a telescope and working with a laptop. But boy, I was glad to be back, come back inside. And I want to tell you that we've achieved some victory. Let me take you to the screen where we loaded frames in. And we were using, on this frame, this CCD inspector, we were using this auto open button. When you click this, it asks, you know, what frame you want to have automatically monitored. And whenever SharpCap would put a new exposure there, it would automatically open it in CCD Inspector. And I'm happy to tell you that although we started out really badly, I mean, we went through from 7 point whatever millimeters that was all the way up to 10, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So finally, near the end, I rolled it back to 7.9 millimeters, and man, I tell you what, I mean, it's not perfect. 31% curvature means there is still a little bit of curvature, but at the same time, guys have always told me, if you can get it to 20 to 30% curvature, then stop and enjoy it. And notice the tilt. I was able to get the tilt, just by God's grace, to 0%. And again, in a RASA, that's only possible if you've got a device like this Octopi-Astro camera interface, because you can adjust all four corners infinitely. So this is a big endorsement for the Octopi-Astro camera interface. But perhaps the biggest endorsement of all would be, let's go over to SharpCap, where I've just been live stacking some an image of the Pleiades for I guess 4.5 minutes.